as Wendy said, you know, this theme emerged largely. We've had a little sort of working group where we just talk about various things, and Lillian spoke about the limbic system and love, and we adopted this theme of love, attachment, and spirituality. And when I thought about how I might contribute something to this symposium with a P, along that theme, what emerged for me was something that is engaging both my personal and my professional life at present. And that has to do with research that Brian Rooney and I are doing with caregivers of people with dementia. And we've been focused largely on their experience with sort of the medical aspects of dementia in the earliest stages, sort of pre-diagnosis and so on, and what's helpful to them and that kind of thing. But in terms of thinking about this forum, it really struck me, well, you know, what exemplifies love and attachment and, dare I say, limbic resonance more than getting up in the wee hours of the morning to go see your mom at the residence, because you got to get there early, because if you're there too late, the sundowning happens, because that doesn't really happen at sundown, right? It happens earlier and early in the day. You got to find that sweet spot. And Brian Rooney told me I could use this picture. And for those of you who are not part of Concordia, we're married, so. So we have access to all kinds of bits of information. Anyway, so this got me thinking about the role of religion, spiritual resources in this caregiver role. And sort of borrowing from Dr. Meyer's talk yesterday, you know, whether that would provide any kind of protective effect for caregivers. So let's just look at the context of caregivers a little bit. And I've just pulled some data here from the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, the World Health Organization. And I think everybody knows this, you know, it's described as the rising tide, with an estimated 1 in 13 people over the age of 65 affected by dementia. If you include people who are diagnosed with early forms of dementia, that's another 700,000 people or so. About 1 in 5 people from the age of 45 up are providing care to a senior with long-term health problems, most notably one of the dementias. About 25% of those caregivers, and informal caregivers, not nursing staff, that kind of person, are themselves seniors, right? So they are also older people. And the strain of that caregiving role can take a really substantial physical and psychological toll. And you know, this is sort of the context for considering why we might need religious community, spiritual sustenance, as we journey along with these people. I've just got a couple of lists here. There we go. Not to point everything out, but it's just well documented that the caregiving role is a very demanding and strenuous one, and particularly so when one is caring for an individual with dementia. You know, it just sort of magnifies the negative impacts of caregiving. So if we look at physical health, again, just sort of listing off, you know, people don't take care of themselves well, they don't eat well, they don't sleep well, they're not sleeping well, they take medications, they have stress-related symptoms, migraines, colitis is common, the immune system is compromised. That's a particular problem for elderly caregivers, right, who are already vulnerable because of age. High blood pressure, risk of heart attack. We were at a Alzheimer's support group meeting in Red Deer not too long ago, and one of the fellows attending the support group mentioned, you know, the health impacts on him. This, we didn't ask, it just sort of came out spontaneously. Then this little ripple went around the room. Oh yes, you know, and really, you know, at the end of that sort of circle, everybody certainly felt that this had had a negative impact on their health. Psychological health as well, most notably depression. So, you know, incidence of depression amongst caregivers to people with dementia are estimated at around 30%, sort of clinically diagnosable depression. That's about twice the rate as you would find in caregivers for people with other sorts of conditions that require care. Stress, fear, you know, exhaustion, physically, emotionally, feeling totally overwhelmed. Grief is huge, right? You have this life partner that you expected to grow old with, to do this and that with. You know, you share this journey in a quite different way than the one that you find yourself sharing with them in the experience that you're facing. I won't talk a lot about this, but it was really interesting to us too, talking to rural participants. I had this stereotype of living in a rural community, and the community all gathers around and offers support, and that's not at all what people described to us. They talked about a stigma, a fear, of sort of a dissipation of many of their sort of social contacts. Lots of family conflict we heard about too. Children who think dad did the wrong thing, putting mom into the nursing home, that kind of thing. So there's a great big package here that's a little bit difficult to measure precisely, and researchers sort of tackle it, you know, in different ways. But collectively, that sort of package of impacts is collectively referred to in the literature as caregiver burden. So what I got interested in as a consequence of our discussions was, you know, is that caregiver burden lightened by our religious community, our religious involvement, spiritual resources, those kinds of things. So I just started sort of looking at this research, and there's a model that I've adapted a little bit. It's called the stress process model, and I've just simplified it here. It was originally presented in the 1990s, and these McLennan et al. Modified it, and I've modified it further. But just sort of to clarify my thinking, I just pared it down. So you can think of background and contextual factors, and I've glossed over many things that have an impact on caregiver burden. So whether you're a senior yourself or whether you're younger, whether you're a daughter or a daughter-in-law. Daughters tend to be more stressed than daughters-in-law, for example. So a variety of contextual factors that can have a bearing on that caregiver burden, how stressful you perceive this caregiving task to be. And then that caregiving burden will have impacts on one's physical and mental health. So, you know, thinking again, sort of, you know, Dr. Meyer's talk was really interesting. I kept thinking, oh, well, that's a great way to conceptualize it. You know, he talked about, or the way I sort of thought of how he was talking about was religion buffering some of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, right? Having a buffering or a mediating effect. So one question is, can religion or spirituality mediate that caregiver burden, right? Can it protect us? Can it buffer us a little bit from some of those negative impacts? A less intuitive question, but a really interesting one as well, is whether that caregiving experience can promote spiritual growth and development, right? And I'm using religion and spirituality in a bit of a wiffly-waffly way. And that is what I have seen in the literature. Religion, religiosity, religious engagement is easy to measure, relatively speaking. You know, how frequently do you attend church? How frequently do you pray? You know, there are things you can often tick off, right? Spirituality is commonly defined as a sense of connectedness to oneself, to others, a sense of the divine or the transcendent. You can't tick the boxes on that one, right? It's much harder to sort of grasp. And you see both the terms in the literature. The bulk of research has been directed here, but I see some research emerging on this sort of question of emergent spirituality. And of course they're linked, right? So if I just sort of take that model and muck around with it a little bit more, you know, we can think of sort of these background context demographic variables as being related to or interacting with the spiritual and or religious resources that we have available to us, and those may mediate or buffer that caregiver burden a little bit. So again, sort of drawing on our group, we have people doing qualitative research. I come from a quantitative research background. I really want ANOVAs and regression analyses and that kind of thing make me feel better somehow. Anyway, I'm trying to loosen up, and I see, you know, the value in looking at these things together. So, so John Stuckey has done a lot of the research in the area, at least the bulk of the research that I came across. And I'm just going to illustrate, you know, with a few studies. This was a study that he conducted with 52 caregivers. 32 of those were caregivers of people with dementia, and I'm sort of going to focus on their responses. And as is done, I am learning in qualitative research. You know, you ask a variety of open-ended questions and look for themes in people's responses. And he had both religious and non-religious participants in his study. So he had Catholics, Protestants from a variety of denominations, and people who didn't identify with any faith perspective, and Jewish people as well. And across the religious participants, the dominant themes were using faith to help one cope. One of the participants, I won't look back for the exact quote, but it was lovely. This person described having God as part of her support network, right? He's on my team. God's, you know, with me every day. That theme of God in daily life, and private religious practices, in addition to sort of, you know, church attendance and the social dimensions, faith and prayer on a daily basis. But interestingly, I thought, among both the people who sort of professed a religious affiliation and those who did not, and that included atheists and agnostics, all of them talked about life as sort of a moral journey, being called to care for other people, serving others, even if that comes at some cost to oneself, and having an optimistic outlook. And I will read this quote. I thought it was very lovely, and this is actually from a female agnostic caregiver. If you cannot change something, if you can just stop struggling for a moment and be still and let it evolve, it might evolve into something really good. Same thing. And I think if I do my best within the context of it and stop struggling and try to enjoy it, then that's enough. And I think that speaks actually to emerging spirituality as well, right? It's a shift in focus. In the quantitative research, how does this play out? So here's a numbers study. I haven't put the numbers up there, but what these researchers did was study a group of Mexican-American caregivers whose sort of religiosity tends, this is a US-based study, tends to be a little bit higher on average. They had, you know, tick-the-box measures of religiosity, frequency of church attendance, that kind of thing. They also had measures of caregiver well-being, something called the caregiver well-being scale. The perceived burden was part of that, and mental and physical health. And interestingly, so I've just plucked a couple of things out of here, sort of higher scores on that scale of church attendance, engagement with a religious community, was associated with lower scores on the perceived burden index, you know, scale score. But they identified sort of a subset of negative religious coping. And that had to do with maybe sort of something that Wendy was talking about, you know, feeling guilt, right? This has happened to me because God is angry with me. God has abandoned me in my hour of need. So that sort of negative, guilty, religious interpretation was associated with higher scores, not surprisingly, higher scores on their measure of depression. So that's kind of thinking of religion, spirituality as a bit of a buffer. How do we use it to help us cope? Sort of rejigging this model again a little bit. We can think of, background and contextual factors. People may or may not bring sort of a pre-existing religious or spiritual framework in concert with those factors. There's a caregiver burden, and perhaps out of that caregiving experience will emerge an enhanced sense of one's spirituality, one's spiritual self, one's connectedness with others, connectedness with God. So that's what these researchers, Jenny Netto et al., addressed in again, a qualitative study with 12 caregivers in 2009. They identified in people's responses 3 themes. People talked about this being an opportunity for personal growth. I had to become more patient. I had to slow down, be more understanding. People talked about having stronger relationships with the person they were caring for, as well as with other people in their family. But relevant or germane to what I'm sort of honing in on here was there was a very strong theme also of what they called higher level gains, and I would say in this context would be encapsulated as spiritual growth, aspects of altruism. So, and I'll just read you one respondent's response here. Who said, "It's an enriching experience. Initially it was a sense of duty, but after a while I found it was above that. I don't just see her as my mother, but as another person. It's my chance to do a good deed for another person. We as humans should be kind to one another. It's more noble that way, to give. So I would say that in that sense, I've grown spiritually." So this research kind of shifts the focus a little bit from the conventional focus on what are the burdens, how does this drag you down, to how does this lift you up? Can it lift you up in some ways? People have also looked at this with a more numeric approach. So McLennan and colleagues used measures of caregiving burden again, finding meaning through caregiving, and had measures of both physical and mental health. They used a regression analyses, tested many models by entering variables in different orders. What I plucked out of that in a principled kind of way, to make a point, was that, burden, the score on the caregiver burden scale did indeed predict mental health. So there's an association there. If you feel more burdened, you're more likely to have mental health problems. When they added scores on this, have you found any meaning in this experience scale, and added that, what they found was that relationship between burden and mental health was reduced, statistically significantly reduced. In other words, if you found some emergent meaning in that process, it did ease the burden. It did lift that caregiving burden from you to some extent. So, what emerges out of this, and there are lots of caveats, and 20 minutes isn't enough time to sort of go through that. But I think there's an emerging literature that is still young that suggests that existing religious engagement, spiritual engagement, may ease the burden for caregivers, and that buffering effect. And again, as Dr. Myers said yesterday, that may be attributable in large part to the psychological phenomena whereby social support is helpful to us in our lives. So maybe that's kind of intuitive. I think what's maybe less intuitive and is maybe a little bit more interesting is that the challenges associated with caregiving actually do provide opportunities as well, and they provide opportunities to experience spiritual growth. Not just, I mean, I've just focused on the caregiver here, but again, in a little bit of the research, I would have to look to find the author's name. I can't, but their study was entitled, Finding the Spirit in the Small Things, I think was roughly the title. And they talk about how all the parties, the caregivers, the nursing home staff, and indeed the person with dementia themselves, in the little things in daily life, can find opportunities to grow. And I think of Brian's mom in the nursing home, who for the first time in a very long time has had an opportunity to feel like she's contributing. She's able to see somebody in distress and pat them on the shoulder. She's more mobile than some, so she's able to pick something that somebody's dropped up, and she loves to fold things, and she'll fold and fold and put it back down. So it's in those small things she has an opportunity to grow. I think of one of the cafeteria ladies who's just wonderful. She's just a bright spirit in this ward where you walk in and it just seems so miserable. And she makes sure that she prepares something to tempt the appetites of everybody who's difficult to feed, like my mother-in-law, right? Now, Valerie, she'll say with her Newfoundland accent that I can't tease. I know you want the pudding, but could you just try a bit of the sandwich? I think I'm doing Irish, not Newfoundlander. Anyway, it's a way of reframing, I suppose, to make this a little bit more positive. Okay, thank you.